I was gay. Oh, God, I knew this would happen. As I stared ahead and directly into my neighbor's bedroom through his window, I couldn't help but mourn my innocence. Where were those days when the highlight of my days was screeching and laughing with my best friends in the local park, and not sneaking glances at my very hot and very shirtless neighbor? Where were those days? Why was I spending hours of my days wanting to kiss my neighbor? At some point, I even considered going to church so that I can be removed of this sin, but then I thought, meh, it shouldn't be so bad. I was supposed to love women, but I was made in such a way that I loved men. What was the problem with that? So, silently, I accepted it. And in my silence, I appreciated men. So it shouldn't be so surprising that I was doing the same here. My neighbor, Ron, was working out. His sweaty back was on full display, and I wasn't sure if he knew, but he was hot. If clicking pictures of total strangers without their permission wasn't so immoral, I would have done that right now. At night, I would have looked at those pictures and thanked God for giving me reasons to love men of all creatures. My thoughts turned into reality soon after. A few days after I noticed a shirtless Ron for the 9th time, he cornered me in the local supermarket and asked if I had a habit of acting like a peeping Tom. I blushed at him. "I'm sorry. I do not think you've got the right guy, Ron." "Josh," Ron said, "if you want to kiss me, just say so." Oh, well, the offer sounded so good that I decided to come clean. "I want to kiss you," I confessed and nodded my head as if he couldn't understand the simple confession I made. He smirked, and suddenly he looked as old as he was. 26. He was 26. I might just know the best place to kiss. And then he brought me to the church. No, we did not kiss in the church. We kissed in the garden behind the church. The trees here were tall, and the bushes wide and green. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me behind one of the trees and then gave me several toe-curling kisses. When we were done, I asked if he wanted to date me. I wasn't sure how desperate he was, but he accepted it. He replied that he would like to know what dating younger guys feels like. I was 19, so there was a good 7 years of age gap between us. And, apparently, that age gap was enough to excite him. He always looked so hyperactive around me that I was sure my first relationship was going to be the best relationship in the whole wide world. Obviously, I was wrong. Not even 4 weeks into our relationship, and I knew this guy was not good news. But I didn't know any better, and Ron seemed like the best option to understand myself. Bitter as I was, I decided to remain close to him, hoping that my love would bring some manners into him. It didn't, obviously. "Can you behave for once?" I asked, a little irritated as I poked and prodded the hickey that he had left on the side of my neck. At the peak of summer, there was no way I could hide that mark from anyone, much less my parents. "I have asked you 100 times to not give me a hickey where everyone can see. And do you even understand one thing that I tell you? It was a simple request. Do not leave a hickey." "Can you stop being so pissy?" he asked, sounding bored. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Stop whining like a baby. Use makeup or something." I was in disbelief, more so when he waved his hand in a careless manner. How dare he, I thought, and then I fumed. When he didn't say anything, I decided it was time to speak up. "You know what? No more kisses in the bed. I am done." "It's not like we're having sex," Ron replied and returned to his phone. "You don't have to act like I have done a very bad thing." Oh God, shut up. I grabbed my bag and jumped through his window to the little garden that our houses shared. "Don't call me, Ron. I am warning you." "You'll come back to me," he said. "I never do. You always do." And as much as I wanted to punch his handsome face, I knew he was right. Screw you, stupid Ron, I thought to myself. A few days later, I was frustrated and hurt. Ron's callousness towards me was of the worst kind. It was so bad that at some point I wanted to return to his bedroom and break up with him, but he was the only person that knew my secret, and I decided I did not want to give him that power. So, a few days after that small argument between us, I decided to tell my 2 best friends about it. If they accepted me, good. If they did not, well, I could still find new friends. Guys, I began with tear-soaked cheeks, wondering if I was about to lose my best friends. I am gay. My friends Ella and Kit looked at each other before gasping. "Oh, is that a bad thing?" I asked. "Oh, no, Josh, but are we supposed to act surprised?" I mean, I don't know, I asked, a little confused. What was going on? Josh, Ella said, and then Kit repeated. Josh, thank you for telling us. Are we the first people you've told this to? I wiped the tears away from my face. No, I have a boyfriend. Oh, what the hell? Ella screeched. You told a guy you're gay. Before you told your best friends, Kit added rather passionately. Is that all you guys are upset about? I asked, somewhat in disbelief. I'd heard horror stories about how best friends either ditched the gay friend or revealed their secrets to everyone without the gay friend's permission. But I was pretty sure I was not going to experience any of that with Kit and Ella being Kit and Ella. I thought it was going to be worse. Dude, Ella said and picked up her bag. It's the 21st century. Grow up, Kit added, though he was smiling. I understood we were young, but I also didn't understand why they weren't married already. Ella and Kit could fix each other. Later, when the college hours ended, they asked me about my boyfriend. When they noticed how much I moaned and groaned in distaste, the only advice they could give me was, dump him. I was sure I was going to take their advice sooner than later. After coming out to my best friends, I wasn't very conscious of how many people knew about my sexuality. I was even relieved that I could be free of the secret now. So within the next few days, the words of my sexuality reached every corner of the college. But, for the most part, it was alright. Every so often, I received general pats on my back from strangers. Sometimes I received shoves on my back. That was how I knew it wasn't going to end well for me. When Kit asked if I was going to tell my parents about it, I glared at him and asked if he wanted to see me homeless. He laughed and patted my back, and then promised that there was no way my parents were that bad. I rolled my eyes and reminded him who my parents were. Some days after coming out to my best friends, I received my first dose of bullying. It was humiliating, to say the least. But heartbroken and insulted, I hid myself for the entirety of the day in the closet, and only came out when Kit and Ella kept calling and asking where I was. When I told them, they came to me and helped me reach home safely. I'm sorry, Josh, Kit said and helped me on my feet. Straight people are so disappointing. You're straight, I reminded him, and didn't ask him to stop when he dabbed his clean napkin all over my cheeks. I hadn't noticed the tear tracks on my cheeks. He smiled ruefully. Unfortunately, yes. A few days later. My parents were at the church when I visited Ron the next time. He had left his window open for easy access, and bodily pulled me in through the window when I begged him. I couldn't tell my parents about it, I said and showed him the bruises around my wrist. So I'm telling you, what should I do? Why did you tell them? I told my best friends, I replied in a deadpan voice, upset that he was wondering about that instead of answering my question. And they took it very nicely. So I thought most would take it nicely, right? And honestly, it's not that bad. This was the worst that has happened. Didn't you say they chased after you? They're bullies. They chase people like dogs. I waved my wrist in front of his face. What should I do, Ron? Avoid it, he replied. What do you mean? I was flabbergasted. He was older than me. He ought to know how to deal with this issue. I knew better than to let my bullies do whatever the hell they wanted to do. Shouldn't you advise me to inform my parents or contact the college dean or something? And what good will that do for you? Ron! I screeched, confused by his answers. You're gay, Josh, in a religious fucking town. What else did you expect? I'm gay, and no one other than my mom knows about it. And the only reason she's okay with it is because she has no other family member for herself. You're supposed to take lessons from cases like me. You're out. Ron threw his hands in the air. It's basically like begging for trouble. There were tears in my eyes. Are you serious? I'm serious, Josh. You know this will get bad. And you're not going to help me? I barked. I shoved him again and again. The tears were now running down my cheeks. You're my boyfriend. You're supposed to be there for me. When I talked to my best friends about it over the phone, they repeated the same thing. Dump him, bro. So I did. And just to be cruel, I did it over the text. Over the next few days, Ron kept sending me angry messages after angry messages. First sounding desperate to have me back, and then promising that I'd come to regret it sooner rather than later. I didn't. The only thing I missed was actively getting the chance to kiss a man. Just when I expected Ron to be over with his creepy advances, he cornered me right when I came out of my college, and dragged me into an empty alley only to brutally shove me against the wall and demand an explanation out of me. Did I ever say that his strength was both a turn-on for me and a thing to fear? Over the time that we had been boyfriends, it was something that he always made use of to gain an advantage over me. Baby, He said like one of those haggard husbands who beat their wives and then apologize for it because she wouldn't talk to him. What have I done to deserve this treatment? I love you, Josh. I don't want to be with you anymore, I replied, sounding sure despite wincing each second as he clutched his hands tighter over my wrist. So kindly, fuck off. Josh, baby, listen. We can do something about that. What exactly, Ron? You lay low, alright? Don't talk back to them, and it'll be alright. He kept on going with several stupid suggestions in a row. I rolled my eyes at each other until I realized he was drunk. Suddenly, his stinky breath and the rough hold on my wrists made sense. Leave me, I said. What? He asked. Let me go! Ron halted and pulled back and then dropped my hands. Josh? This is it, Ron. I do not want to be with you, ever. He swallowed, though I could see his eyes hardening. You'll come back to me, like you always do, Josh. I grabbed my bag and walked out of there. I thought the day would end just like that. But then a horde of students were coming out of the college just now, and I knew I'd find my bullies here. And I did. Just like always, they hollered something stupid behind my back and then shoved me when I didn't say anything back. Until I finally did. Screw yourself! And apparently that was the wrong thing to say. What did you say? You little... One of them shouted, and I ran. I ran like a maniac, like a blind person with no sense of direction or safety. And perhaps that was why it didn't come to a surprise to me at all when I ended up in a near accident and straight into the arms of the very last person I wanted to be around. Oh, let me rectify that. I did not end up in anyone's arms, and certainly not in the arms of a hot and handsome guy. But rather, I ended up in front of a massively built bike of what looked like a massively built man. I knew I was in trouble long before I felt his eyes on me. You little gremlin, the man muttered when a cop flagged us down and asked him to hold still. I swallowed and looked at his helmet-covered face. This was either going to end very badly or very well, but never in between. But most importantly, I knew I was going to get killed. A few hours later. You will have to pay a fine. I stole a glance at the guy to mark my apology, but his eyes were trained on the police officer. They looked like old friends. I was mildly surprised. Mildly because people like Jaxon, the guy I had crashed into, knew in and out of the system. Everyone who understood the system hated it, and Jaxon was one of them. I knew that fact in my guts. Oh, fuck off, Jaxon replied, cool and aloof. I balked. The audacity. And that's $100 more, Jaxon. The police officer chimed. They acted like they were old friends. No respect at all. You don't actually have to pay, I replied like a sage I knew my parents wanted me to be. It's against the law. Jaxon and the police officer stole a glance at each other, and then Jaxon asked, Will you stay silent, little gremlin? Could he stop calling me that? When we walked out of there, the same police officer was patting Jaxon on the back and laughing along with some of his jokes. It was a bizarre sight. I was the victim in this little accident, at least in some ways, and they were joking and having fun. I couldn't wait to inform Kit and Ella about it. It was late in the evening. My phone battery was dead, and I had no way of going home. The only option I had was to walk for some 25 minutes to the nearest bus stand, and I was pretty sure I was tired, and that was the last thing I wanted for myself. Dejected, I sat by one of the little benches outside of the station and looked down at my feet. I was saved today by my own stupidity, but I couldn't tell how bad it was going to be tomorrow. High school bullies were monsters, but college bullies? They were older and human, and that made everything so much worse. Maybe Ron was right, I internally mused. How are you going home, little gremlin? Jaxon asked, standing right in front of me. His tall, glorious form was on full display, and I couldn't help but drag my eyes slowly up from his powerful thighs, to his upper frame, and then finally his extraordinary frame. Now, Jaxon was blonde, and as disrespectful as I didn't want to be, he looked like your typical white boy. And perhaps I said it aloud because he narrowed his eyes at me and then rolled his eyes. I was being kind, he replied, stretching one tattooed arm to grab his helmet, and you're being very rude. I flushed a shade of red, instantly reminded of who he was. I'm sorry, I replied. I did not mean to offend you. Damn you people. He started walking towards his bike, and I knew this was my last chance. I followed after him, trying to look as pathetic as possible. Can you please drop me off at the bus stand? It's late. He narrowed his eyes again. I am not your driver. I know, but it would be really great if you could help me. He sighed and then equated. Sometime later. Look, you have to tell me what happened. You could have seriously been hurt, and despite my reputation, I do not want any blood on my hands, alright? It was Jaxon, and he wouldn't shut up. We were on his bike, and he said it would be better if he dropped me off at my home. I knew it was a bad idea, but I was sleepy, tired, and exhausted. My core instincts were the last things working in my body. I do remember seeing someone after you. And because I was sleepy, tired, and exhausted, I didn't think twice before answering. I was being chased by my bullies. Why do you have bullies? He shouted. Because I am gay, and they don't like that I like men. He went silent, and then didn't say a word until we reached my home. Before leaving, he asked what college I was studying at. Stupid as I was, I told him. He gave me a salute and then drove away. Sometime later. Okay, so here was the deal with Jaxon. And yes, I was basing all this information on a bunch of rumors I'd heard so far about him. Allegedly, Jaxon came from a poor family. His mom was a drug addict, and his father was a massive drunkard. Things were bad at home, so Jaxon decided the best way to deal with so much stress and nonsense at home was to join the local thug group. A group basically consisting of homeless young adults and rich young adults who liked to let off the steam sometimes. They weren't really involved in anything bizarre. They just liked making any policeman's life a living hell. That was their main goal. Over the years, and especially after he finished high school, Jaxon grew more and more popular around the town for being a charming and handsome lad, who had at least a few hundred fans in this town alone. Forget about religious parents and their teachings. Most of the kids I knew wanted Jaxon for themselves. He was that hot. Was I blind to it? I knew wanted Jaxon for themselves. He was that hot. Was I blind to it? Obviously not. But the more popular he grew, the more parents and cops hated him. Since they couldn't really jail him for speed biking for the rest of his life, they started fabricating lies about his nature and mannerisms to make sure their kids stayed away from him. Some of these rumors involved him being an abusive drunkard just like his dad, or having killed a little kid during a bike race, etc. I grew up hearing this part about his life, hence my belief that I was going to get killed by Jaxon and his friends one of these days. It was with this thought of dying that I wondered if I should inform my parents of being gay or not. I mean, dying from their hands should be better than dying from Jaxon's or my bullies' hands, right? Even then, I held it to myself for a while. Not until I absolutely had to, I decided. My parents, for the most part, were serious and grim kind of people. Even then, I looked at my mom and asked, "Do I look like a little gremlin to you, Mom?" She looked at me for a second, as if in contemplation, and then firmly shook her head. "Josh, you look like James Dean." My dad coughed behind his hands and muttered a soft, "What a lie." I rolled my eyes. These were the kind of people I was afraid of. Sometimes I wondered if telling them would be worse than not telling them. "Dad," I said, sounding offended. "At least Gremlin is cute," he replied. I made a face. Gremlin is not cute. When we were done with dinner, I texted Kit and Ella about what had happened. They expressed their genuine shock, and Ella even made me laugh by messaging, "You found your white savior." I was white, so I did not understand what that was about. I sent her a thumbs up, and she replied with a bunch of profanities. When I fell asleep, I had a dream about Jaxon. Nothing vile, just that the dream, Jaxon was eager to hug me to sleep. He had asked, "Hugs make it all better, no?" And I replied with, "Yes, it does." In the morning, I wondered if Jaxon needed a hug. A few days later, things were bad. When my parents got me into this uni over a year ago, their main goal was to make sure I came here and studied to become something. But a year from that time, and I was wasting my time hiding from my bullies, who claimed that they'd taken great offense to my reply from that day. I was furious and upset. One of them had shoved me so hard, it had busted my middle finger. I also got a tiny scratch on my temple and bled from there. Furious as I was, I showed them the same middle finger and then ran away from there before they could catch me. Now, I was hiding in a closet. I was upset. I was furious. I couldn't believe straight people had such an audacity. "I'm sorry on behalf of all straight people," Kit added for the 9th time. "But I swear, Josh, not all of us are like this." Ella nodded. Some people really have nothing special going on in their lives, so they decide this is the best way to deal with their own disappointing lives. "How am I going to explain this to my mom?" I moaned and touched my new bruises. Just days earlier, I had to give flimsy excuses about how I gotten several scratches and bruises. Now, again? I was sure they were bound to get suspicious at some point. Telling them I am gay should be better than them assuming that I'm involved with some shady people, honestly. Kit, Ella, should I tell them? They shrugged, the useless people that they were. I sighed and looked at my middle finger. Maybe that was a hint that I shouldn't give a lot of care? Whatever. I bid Ella and Kit goodbye, only to come face to face with Jaxon sitting on his bike, staring at me from across the street. He had his usual leather jacket over his frame, and he looked very grave. Was not surprised to see him there. In the last few days, I'd seen Jaxon with a few strangers outside my college. Each time I looked at him, he had looked at me, and then I'd start finding my way home. I wondered if he wanted me to return the money he had to pay to the police because of me. Just like the last few days, I started on my way home. This time, however, he followed me. I knew it was his bike long before he stopped it beside me. "Hey," he said, his voice sounding soft despite his rough appearance. "Bullies again?" I nodded. "Bullies again. Get on the bike." I looked at him with narrowed eyes. I wasn't sure where I got the random burst of confidence in front of him. I was pretty sure I was afraid of him just a minute ago. "Why?" "Just get on it. I'll treat that." Okay?" Against my better judgment, I decided to sit with him. Sometime later, Jaxon brought me to a ragged place that I knew only bad people knew about. I wondered, since I had seen this place, was I a bad person too? He patted at a dirty couch and asked me to sit down on it. "I'll go ask the guys about stuff for that." He pointed at the bruise on my temple. Kit, Ella, and I had cleaned it earlier, but it wasn't properly cleaned, given my hesitance to explain anything to the nurse. "Okay," I replied with a smile and looked at the dirty couch. I decided not to sit. God only knew what was on it. When Jaxon returned, he gave me a small laugh. "I knew you wouldn't sit on it. Here, place it there." He gave me a clean cloth, and I threw it over the couch, and he, hear me out, crouched in front of me. Even like this, he reached my face. What the hell? This was so romantic, I was ready to throw caution out of the window right then and there. "Brush your hair aside," he said. "I think you've done something about it." He continued and rubbed a calloused finger right next to the cut. "But it needs more. Otherwise, it'll get infected. Sit still, alright?" And as he said all that, he was looking straight into my eyes. And I wondered, did he know? Did he know he was as hot as hell? And that if he asked me, I would commit all the sins my parents had warned me against? People like him knew, right? People like him knew, right? Because each time he dabbed a cotton over the cut, I swooned. This was the guy they said was the absolute worst in this town. And Jaxon was sitting right in front of me, treating my cut? What the hell? I was never going to trust another cop after this. Over the next few weeks, Jaxon displayed a similar bizarre attitude when it came to me. He almost always was there when I was done with my classes, and now waved at me each time. He'd either drop me at home on his bike, or bring me to a place or two that I had absolutely no idea about. But before we go there, we need to know what happened with my parents the same day Jaxon treated my cut. The evening my cut was treated by Jaxon. "You're a what?" It was my mom. My dad was sitting very still, looking up at the ceiling and carefully not saying a word to ease the tension in the family. "You said you're a... She wouldn't finish the sentence. I rolled my eyes, though it was true I was internally trembling. A wrong word from them, and I would burst into tears. "A gay, Mom. I like men. Please, don't act like I confessed I'm an alien spy or something." "And our family," my dad finally spoke up. "You're the first man who likes men. Of course, you're an alien concept." "You don't have to be disrespectful, Dad." He shrugged and looked at his nails. My mom kept looking at me. "And me being gay is the reason I'm getting bullied. Hence," I pointed at my face, "if you kick me out now, I will get bullied more. And this will be a pretty regular thing, so..." I stopped and shrugged and then looked at my feet. "Why would we kick you out, Josh?" It was my mom. There were tears in my eyes. "I don't know. Homophobic parents do it all the time. Considering you guys are pretty religious, I wouldn't really be surprised, you know? Why do you assume we are homophobic?" she asked. "In fact, why would you assume my religion can stop me from loving my son? I have not given my religion that power over me, Josh. I shall never." I was surprised. That was the most blasphemous thing she had ever said. "Mom? Dad, Mom's going to hell." "Josh," she warned as my dad and I looked at her. She closed her eyes for a second. "Josh, You're my son, alright? It'll take me some time to get used to the idea, but that does not mean that you're no longer my son. Or that we will kick you out, my dad added. Give us some time, my mom continued. It's alright, Josh. Have you told anyone about the bullying? Should we get involved? It'll only make it worse, I muttered, though I wasn't sure. We'll talk to your dean, alright? My dad said. I am not letting anyone's wayward kid hurt my child, Josh. Oh, Dad, Mom. I started sobbing. In my emotional state, I confessed about my secret relationship with my ex, Ron. They looked flabbergasted, as if they couldn't believe that they didn't know at some point I'd been dating our neighbor. But to divert their attention, I decided to tell them how bad he was to me. At the end of the day, they were troubled about two things. Should they focus on their son's sexuality, or the fact that their 26-year-old neighbor was dating their 19-year-old son at some point and was being abusive to him? All in all, I would say it went pretty well. A few days later. This is a very nice hangout place, I said and looked around the poor structure around us. Jaxon and I were seated on the couch, and we had just finished watching a foreign horror movie. It was scary and creepy, to say the least. I needed to distract myself before I could imagine some half-bodied woman crossing the structure to try and reach me. Should I tell Kit and Ella about it? Who are they? Jaxon asked. My besties, I replied. They were the second and third person I told about my sexuality. Oh, who was the first? He asked, and then, was it me? I gave him a small smile. No, unfortunately, it was my ex. Jaxon gave me a small laugh. Nice. Can I tell Kit and Ella about this place? I asked again. Jaxon shrugged. You can, but I will not recommend coming here without me until you get to know everyone here. It's safer that way, you know? Okay. I nodded my head. He wouldn't bring his eyes away from me. What? I asked and gave him a small, nervous laugh. You know, I miss academic places, he began suddenly. I finished high school a few years ago, and then never got the chance to study any further. I wanted to become a chemist, but never got the chance, you know? And then I see you coming out of the college 5 days a week, and I cannot help but want to be on that side of the road, you know? I am saving money, he added, so hopefully that will happen sooner than later. I hope it does, Jaxon. Jaxon gave me a small smile, and after a minute of waiting, carefully brought a hand to my face and brushed aside the fringes from my temple. Your cut is healing fast. It's almost gone. My heart was racing, but I composed myself. It was a small cut. You're scared, right? Thinking that he was indicating about himself and the world he was coming from, I shook my head and told him that I wasn't scared. But then he asked what was behind me, and I freaked out so much that I screamed. He started laughing. You're scared. Josh, she will come after you. He was talking about the ghost. Damn him. A few days later. You cannot tell me you've never been here. Jaxon exclaimed and dragged me to the beach. This is the best place to be, and I will tell you an even better place. Just give me some moments. Then he dipped into the ocean and didn't come out of it for the next 10 minutes. When he did come out of there, I made sure not to stare at the wrong places. I blushed, though, and if he noticed, he didn't say anything. I have been here, I replied. My parents aren't boring people or my besties. Alright, little gremlin. Let me bring you someplace even better. Can you not call me that? Oh, do you hate it? He asked, sounding genuinely worried. But I did not hate it. What's the place? I asked. He smiled. You'll love it. The same evening when I reached home, my mom and dad were sitting in the living room, looking anxious. When they saw me, my mom burst into tears. Worried, I asked her what happened. Why are you going away from us? I couldn't understand the question. What does that mean? Josh, we told you we just needed some time. Why have you started lying to us? It was my dad. What did I lie about? You said you're going to meet Kit and Ella, but they came over here, looking for you just 2 hours ago. Where were you? And that reminded me that I had forgotten to update Kit and Ella about my current situation with Jaxon. I was at, the church. Stop lying, my dad warned. Okay, what the hell? I was with Jaxon. I told you, my mom said. He's hanging out with the wrong people. No, Mom, he's not a bad person. I like him. My mom and dad looked at each other. We are hanging out, all right? And he's a nice guy. A few days later, Jaxon and I were on the couch again, but this time he was sitting while facing me. So much attention from him was driving me nuts, but I managed somehow. How are your parents? You never talked about them. It was me, and I asked him to distract myself from his body heat. It was embarrassing to admit he had so much influence over me. Mom's at my Nana's place, recovering from her addiction. Dad's at home, but I spend most of my time here, so I don't see them often. Oh, I replied. Have you lost all contact with your boyfriend? Jaxon asked. I shrugged. I mean, as much as I could. He's my neighbor after all, but he doesn't bother me anymore. So, you're single? I flushed a shade of red and then nodded. Do you like me, Josh? Jaxon softly asked. And that was something I couldn't deny. I do, I replied. Do you like me? I mean, you're nice and all. He was smiling, and I couldn't help but smile back. Of course, I like you, Josh. Why else would I hang out with a church kid? Hey, I said. He grabbed my hand and asked me to sit just like him. I did, and by this moment, I was very aware of the world around us. Or, well, the lack of anyone around us. This, I knew, was the moment I was going to throw caution out of the window. Do you want to kiss me, Josh? He asked, and I nodded. Jaxon then grabbed my upper thigh and pulled me close to himself. And I thought, God, his seduction game was so strong. I never stood a chance against him. And then we kissed. Sometime later. Your grades are really good, my mom said, and I looked at my results. I smiled in return. You haven't changed, Josh. I'm so happy. My smile dropped, and I replied in a deadpan voice. I'm not going to change just because I said I'm gay, Mom. Yes, but Josh, I was scared, and I'm sorry. She stopped and placed her phone on her lap. Your dad and I were talking about this some time ago, and we couldn't help but feel remorse that we weren't there when you probably needed us the most. Josh, we don't want to miss this any more than we already have, son. Mom? I said. We love you, Josh, all right? Never forget that. It doesn't matter who you like, as long as you don't lose the most essential aspect of yourself. We care about that only, Josh. Please forgive us. I hugged her and thanked her. Then I thought if forgiving her meant that I could be honest about my new relationship with Jaxon. Then I thought, what the hell? She just asked me to not keep anything from her, and who was I to deny her of that? So I told her that. What do you mean? She asked. I smiled. Jaxon's my boyfriend. A few days later. Jaxon, I said and looked at him through the mirror on his bike. Could you please tame your hair a little before you come to meet my parents? It's important. He stopped his bike abruptly. What do you mean? I mean, you don't have to cut your hair if you don't want to. No, Josh, what do you mean by the other thing? I replied. Do you want to meet my parents? Oh, what the hell? I do. Jaxon was smiling behind his helmet. Lovely. Just cut your hair. I am not cutting my hair, he said and started the bike again. Your parents are going to see the real side of your boyfriend. Oh, well, I thought to myself. Conclusion. My parents talked to my school's dean, and with Jaxon being my boyfriend, the thing with my bullies stopped by the end of the next 2 months. Now people rarely bothered me about my sexuality. Jaxon and I are in the first stage of our relationship, the honeymoon phase, and it's going as well as one can imagine. The end. Who helped you the most during your times of crisis? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force and to stay wholesome.